It all started 8 years ago, when I thought I'd finally made it. I had landed one of the biggest freelance contracts of my life. A wealthy businessman named Mr. Collins wanted me to handle an entire project for his company. He was charming, persuasive, and always talked about trust and loyalty. I believed him. For 3 straight months, I worked day and night, no weekends, no breaks. Emails, reports, presentations, I gave him everything he asked for. And when the project finally succeeded, he praised me in front of everyone. He said, "You're the reason we made this work." Then he smiled and vanished. No payment. No replies. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe there was a mistake. But then, I found out he had done the same thing to 2 other people, and none of us could reach him. He blocked my number, ignored my messages, and posted photos of his new luxury car online. That's when I realized, this wasn't business. It was betrayal. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. He may have won the battle, but I would win the war. For the first few months after he disappeared, I was furious, but powerless. Friends told me to move on, to let karma handle it. But I couldn't. Because every sleepless night reminded me that he stole not just my money, but my dignity. So, I started digging. I collected every email, message, and invoice I ever sent him. I backed up all the work I did, every document, every draft. And I began following his company online. For years, I watched quietly. He kept growing, taking bigger contracts, posting smiling photos from luxury hotels, bragging about his hard work and integrity. Each post fueled the fire inside me. But I knew revenge had to be smart, not emotional. Then one day, 5 years later, I noticed something. He posted about expanding his company's brand. That meant new clients, new investments, and new vulnerabilities. So, I created a plan. I built a small consulting firm, legitimate, professional, and quiet. Under a new name, I started offering high-quality services in his industry. Within months, I built a reputation. Slowly, carefully, until my firm became respected. Guess who reached out one day? Him. He had no idea who I was. He emailed me personally, introducing himself, talking about mutual opportunities. My heart was pounding, 8 years of anger suddenly alive again. I played along, pretending to be a stranger. We set up meetings. He spoke confidently, pitching his new project. He even bragged about never having a bad client experience. I smiled. Because this time, the client was me. For weeks, I let him believe he was in control. I gave him proposals, requested down payments, just like he did to me years ago. Except this time, I was documenting everything. Every lie, every promise, every signature. Then came the perfect moment, when he transferred ownership of a deal to my company, not realizing the fine print handed me legal control over his key asset. His greed blinded him, just like I knew it would. I remember the day everything came together like a photograph finally coming into focus. After years of quiet rebuilding, of learning how to take small wounds and turn them into careful strategy, the moment arrived when his arrogance met my patience. He signed the contract with my company in a hushed coffee shop downtown. He laughed about old times, he complimented my new brand, and he promised immediate transfers for the initial milestone, the same pattern he'd used on me 8 years ago. Only this time, the contract had language he'd never read closely. Clauses that gave my firm temporary administrative control over a specific product line and required escrowed milestone payments to be verified by independent auditors. He didn't notice the fine print protections meant to stop a man who trusted greed over due diligence. A week later, like clockwork, he clicked approve and wired the first payment. It hit my company account and then went straight into escrow, as the agreement required. I watched the confirmation ping across my screen and felt a calm wash over me. Not triumph, but the satisfaction of careful justice executed without drama. From there, I moved deliberately. I made no threats. I didn't post screenshots to social media. I did what I'd learned to do. Let the law and procedure do the work I could not in the heat of anger. I presented the evidence to a lawyer I trusted, all the correspondence, the final signed agreement, his initial non-payment from years ago, and notes documenting his pattern of behavior. We filed a formal claim. This time the claim wasn't just about my money. It was backed by the new contract and the escrow terms, and it included corroboration from others he'd harmed over the years. The legal process was slow, patient, and relentless, and that suited me perfectly. Then, I did something else. I reached out to one of his major investors, a person who'd been part of his inner circle for a decade. I didn't rant. I didn't dramatize. I emailed a clear timeline, the original unpaid project, the new contract, the escrow confirmation, and how my company was now a legitimate, growing business with solid clients and verifiable work. I attached notarized copies of the most damning documents, and I included one sentence: "You may want to know where your money is truly going." That email started a ripple. The investor called. The car dealers who had once handed him keys on a handshake suddenly looked for audited ledgers. The contacts he'd relied on began asking, professionally, hard questions. A man who'd always operated in the flattering spotlight now found himself under the clinical beam of verification. When regulators and the company's own accountants began asking for reconciliations, the cracks widened. They requested bank records. They asked for proof of services rendered. Under pressure, old partners began to distance themselves. He tried to spin it with charm, as he always had, but charm is a poor defense against paper trails and notarized contracts. There was a small, almost private victory first. The escrow was released to my company after the auditors verified the deliverables, and he found, for the first time, that honorariums didn't simply dissolve with a smile. The money that he had once taken from me, that had once vanished into luxury purchases and private investments, now sat in my account under the protection of a formal process. I transferred the rightful portion to my team, paid taxes, and saved the rest. It felt oddly mundane, and that was part of the beauty. I reclaimed my work the correct way, with receipts and ledgers, not revenge porn. But the real fallout came when the other claims followed. Small contractors he'd stiffed for years, the designers, the junior developers, the logistics company, started filing their own complaints when they saw auditors publishing anomalies. One by one, other victims stepped forward. The story that began as a solitary betrayal became a pattern, and patterns have a habit of becoming narratives. A journalist from a business outlet picked up the thread after one of the affected vendors showed them the documentation. The article that followed wasn't about me, it was about his pattern of fraud, and my case was a clear example. There were interviews, confirmations, and finally the professional public record that would stand long after tempers cooled. The headline read like a judgment: "Local entrepreneur under audit for systematic non-payment." It wasn't gloating, it was accountability. He called, first in anger, then in bargaining, then in fear. He hired lawyers. He tried to buy silence. He offered partial payments with apologies that sounded hollow even on the phone. I turned them down. I wasn't interested in crumbs. I was interested in a full reckoning, not for revenge's sake, but so he wouldn't do it to the next freelancer, the next small business, the next desperate creative who trusted charm over records. When the legal settlement came, months later, it wasn't cinematic. No dramatic confession in a courtroom. Instead, there were formal agreements, restitution to those he'd wronged, a public acknowledgement with a clause about no future business without oversight, and a private but legally binding financial restitution schedule to settle outstanding debts. His empire didn't collapse in a single headline, but the funds that once funded his lifestyle were redirected to those he'd hurt. It was justice, measured and deliberate. And then came the internal shift in me. The person I used to be, the one who apologized for other people's mistakes, who bowed her head and swallowed tears so others could be comfortable, was gone. I had become someone steadier. I no longer flinched at late-night messages. I no longer wondered what I could have done differently. I had the receipts and the agency now. I used them to build something cleaner and kinder. A small consultancy that paid people on time, respected junior staff, and put transparency at the forefront of every contract. People asked me if I'd wished for him to lose everything. My answer was always the same: I didn't want him to be ruined, I wanted him to be stopped. There's a difference. Ruin is spectacle. Stopping is protection. When a man's pattern endangered others, exposure and restitution became the moral response. The nicest echo of the entire saga came years later when a young designer from my old network messaged me. I almost took a job with him. You saved me. Those 4 words were worth the years of waiting. That message was the real victory, not because it made him suffer, but because it prevented someone else from being hurt. On a quiet Sunday morning, I walked into my tiny office and sat at my desk surrounded by actual work that paid actual salaries on time. I brewed coffee, answered emails, and smiled at a junior designer who asked a smart question. My life was smaller in some ways, bigger in others. It was honest. It was mine. The revenge I had imagined in the early days, screaming confrontations, dramatic betrayals, had transformed into something more sophisticated. Patience, documentation, law, and quiet resilience. I had learned that the most powerful form of revenge is to take back your name, your money, and your dignity without losing your moral compass. If there's a final image I keep with me, it's not of him fearing me. It's of his former clients paying their invoices on time because the industry had to adjust, and of new freelancers being given proper contracts that spelled out payment terms in black and white. Justice had not been theatrical, it had been structural. It changed behavior. Sometimes, when I think back to that girl who cried over lost checks and vanished deadlines, I feel tenderness, not bitterness. She taught me patience. She taught me how to keep notebooks of every email and to save every contract. She taught me to build systems that protect people who are vulnerable to charm. Revenge had turned me into a guardian of fairness. I had taken the hurt and funneled it into something that prevented the same hurt from happening to someone else. The victory tasted sweeter for being quiet, lawful, and enduring. In the end, he did pay, not just because I demanded it, but because the web of documentation and the network of people who finally spoke up demanded it too. He lost access to the unchecked freedom he once enjoyed. I gained a company that did right by its people and the calm, unshakable knowledge that I would never be the person who let herself be silenced again. That, more than any payout, was the final revenge I had imagined on that cold night 8 years ago. To become someone who could turn pain into protection, and to make sure the world I walked in was just a little bit safer for the next person.